How's it going, guys? This is a different video. I doubt I even have music playing or anything, at least right now, because we need to have a talk. This is kind of out of the blue, I know, but lots changed, yet not changed. Well, what's really happened is my attempts at figuring out what's been going on lately have kind of finally started to build to a real conclusion, and unfortunately, it's not been one of the better ones. It's not like I'm dying or anything, but we're not that far off, honestly. And I feel like I need to not owe, but I want to give an explanation a bit about what's been going on. So this isn't about content. This isn't about the stories we share together. This is about me and why the content I've been putting out has been different as of late. Now, thankfully, I've been able to keep my schedule pretty well. Uh, But on my personal life's end, things have kind of taken a very robust turn. And if the channel wasn't such a high priority for me, it would have manifested a lot more. But there are some things working in my favor. But I'm reaching a point where I'm not entirely sure that's going to be the case anymore. That despite my best efforts and best desires, I might not be able to keep making content. I really don't want that to happen, and I think there's a good chance that it won't. But that stopped being a surety a few months ago, and the signs haven't been great. So I need to talk to you about what long COVID is, and specifically what chronic fatigue syndrome is. But the problem is that I can't explain it very well. I've tried to do my research, and I've tried to figure out how I want to have this conversation, but I think I'm gonna need a little help because I can tell you what I've gone through and I can share some of the hearsay we've got, but I'm not in a position to really get a lot of source material from people who actually know what they're talking about. Well, not on my own anyway. I stumbled upon a fantastic video by a YouTuber named, let's see, I gotta make sure I want to say it right because I found it just recently. It's, come on. Trace Dominguez, I believe. Trace Dominguez, who's a creator who does a lot of infomercial, not infomercial, like info breakdowns and almost like short form documentary style videos, mostly just kind of addressing questions that come up and doing dutiful research and everything. Seems really great content. I please check it out. Like I'm gonna have a link at the top of the description. I messaged him saying I wanted to cite his content and his sites because I feel like of all the videos I've been watching and trying to figure out how to best communicate this with you all, his was the best. And I want to make sure that understand that this isn't me taking his content or re-uploading the content. I'm gonna just show core snippets and talk about my experience and kind of how it relates to my personal situation. And just to kind of help clarify a picture, and he's got great quotes. He has an interview with an actual researcher. And yeah, so we're gonna kind of sit down together and I'm gonna show you some highlights and descriptions about what it's like having long COVID and how it relates to chronic fatigue syndrome. And the reason why this matters is because of how directly this affects me. It has become a unavoidable facet of my life. And I knew the instant it started to affect major life decisions that I at least needed to get it off my chest because I've been implying and hinting at it for a while, but I need to kind of just come clean about it because I don't want to talk about it in my videos, but I also need to get it out there just so people can understand and maybe, I don't know, believe me because it's tough. Because unlike other diseases and other other syndromes, you can't look at me and say, "Oh yeah, he's obviously ill." If you lived with me, I think you'd be able to tell, but that's not the case for most people. And I've already had a lot of family raise their eyebrows and be skeptical. So, reason why I'm rambling so much. This is very much from the heart kind of show. I am suffering from what has been termed long COVID. It may be a rebranding or simply a triggering of a latent condition um, called chronic fatigue syndrome or ME. And we'll go over that in a second in the details of like what it means. But I'm saying right now that my doctors are all agreeing that I am a part of this category, and I've been being tested for over a year to try and rule out any chances that it could be anything else, because anything else I might have been able to get treatment for. Unfortunately, it looks like the answer is this. So, thank you so much again. Thank you, Trace. Please check out the video, check out their other content. It's wonderful stuff. I think it's worth taking a look, and I greatly appreciate being allowed to share some of your research in a way that helps me express my feelings, because I'm not really able to do this research myself, not properly. So, thank you. And let's get to what it means to have long COVID.
Long COVID is a brand new disease. It's only a few years old. Without COVID, you don't have long COVID. And it happens to people who get COVID-19 and then have these post-COVID symptoms for weeks or months or longer. That's long COVID. Between 10 and 30% of people who get COVID-19 may develop long COVID.
That's where this condition kind of kicks in for me, because that's the thing is like I did all the things right. Pandemic hit. I believed in pandemics, I wasn't skeptical. Like, it's funny because I remember talking to my wife, and we were reading those first like articles about like this new COVID variant that had been detected in China and was spreading really quickly. It was before they'd even like talked about its virility or anything. And they were just saying that like it was China finally announcing like, okay, there's something actually serious going on here. I remember we were studying in the kitchen. It was like in January, and we were reading this article and talking about it. And I remember even saying, I was just like, if they're saying this now, like if the Chinese government has got to the point where they're like, look, we have like a possible pandemic on our hands, it's already here because our world's too interconnected. It's too easy for somebody to travel ill and to not have it spread. We have tons of videos of like sci-fi and like, what if stories, but the thing is like they're based on a lot of very real trackable data, and it was inevitable that this kind of thing would happen again. And it's not like it hasn't happened before, it will continue to happen, and that's really what makes this the big difference about this. But I remember saying like at that time I was like, look, it's already kind of be here. Like, we got to start getting ready for this now. Sure enough, it did happen. I wish I'd been wrong. I wish I'd just been, worry where I always worry, but this time I was right. So we did everything right. We got our shots. We washed our hands. We social distanced really, really well. We didn't take unnecessary risks. Um, we did all of it by the books, and we made it really far. But unfortunately, as it happens, somebody once we started going back to work and everyone started going back to school and all of that, it kind of wasn't going to be inevitable that somehow we were going to get exposed. And that's why we got the vaccines, and the vaccine did its work. Once we got sick, I didn't get too terribly sick. I have pre-existing conditions of asthma and such. So, like, thankfully, I'm on the younger side. Thankfully, I've lost weight. Um, that would have been very different if I had still been as large as I had been and as inactive as I had been. I think COVID would have been a much different story for me. But because of that, it did hit me the hardest out of the home, but it was mostly gone, except for this fatigue. And it was like I never quite got back up again after that. My coughing went away, my chest pains went away, the nasalness went away, even the taste came back. All the symptoms vanished except for the feeling that you get of just constantly being drained, of your muscles just aching all over, and not it just never stopped. I kind of learned to work around it a bit, but it was just uncomfortable. And I also noticed that like if I went out and did a lot of things, went out and go on walks or visiting like a store or going for a long drive, that I would come home and I would just feel awful. And we're gonna see about that. Trevor brings it up very clearly, Trace brings up very clearly about what this is, which is called post exertion malaise, which we'll talk about in a second.
Long COVID has tons of symptoms ranging from fatigue or cough to trouble thinking, even just pain. These are the most common. Some people experience all of these symptoms, and some will only experience one or two. Clearly, there's a lot to unpack here, so to find out what's happening, if there's anything we can do at all, I called Dr. Zaid Al-Ali, one of the top US experts on ME/CFS and long COVID, which he studies every day.
A lot of people with long COVID have brain fog. A lot of them have fatigue. A lot of them have dysautonomia, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not only that. It's really long COVID is much, much more than that. There are, a lot of people with heart problems, kidney problems, diabetes, high cholesterol. So those are really the long-term health effects of SARS-CoV-2 infection, spanning really a broad array of organ systems, nearly every organ in the body.
So it mentioned there the brain fog, and that's kind of where the story kind of progresses for me. The idea that it started as fatigue, and for a few months I just felt more tired. I figured I'd get out of it. I even had started hearing long COVID, and I'd already talked to my doctor, and they said, all right, well, let's keep an eye on this. And then that's when the tests began. I started seeing cardiologists, I started seeing pulmonologists, I started seeing um like lung and throat doctors. I started getting blood tests, multiple blood tests done. I did breathing studies, sleep studies, and it's gone up till now. Like the most recent test that I've been doing is like they did an ultrasound to study in depth my heart chambers to see if I had any lingering heart damage, because we're kind of at the end of the road of finding a alternative possibility of what this could be. And that's like the heart was kind of like the last one, because most of the time if you have necrotic like atrophied muscle tissue, dead muscle tissue in the heart, you often have a lot of other symptoms, not just fatigue, not just the brain fog and other things. But like we're at the end of the rope for me. There's really nothing else to test for, and that's the thing, is that it's not great, because not only have I not really ever recovered from after COVID, but I've actually gotten worse. After the first few months, I started experiencing dizzy spells. Vertigo became a very big problem. And the thing is, it escalates dramatically when I get sick with something else. I've had 2 colds since COVID, and every time the colds knock me out like COVID did, where I struggle to have any energy at all to get up. I have on and again, off again fevers, and I get terrible vertigo. But the problem is that even when I don't have those symptoms, I do get dizzy very easily. Not just like, oh, I stood up too fast, kind of dizzy. It's like if I swivel my head around too fast, I'll suddenly like the world will feel like it's spinning. Um, I have a very low tolerance for driving in the car, for motion sickness, which I've never had issues with before. Not nearly like this. I haven't dared try and go on any kind of like playground toy or anything with my kids, but like that's just the way it is. Is like I can't tolerate these things that I used to be able to do, and that was not initially a big problem, but it became one. And then the brain fog, which has been the scariest one, has become more and more oppressive lately. And I feel like it's actually trickled into my videos a bit, where I can kind of edit it out, but you might find that I stumble on words that I should know, character names that have been impactful for me. Like, granted, I've not the best memory, but I could talk about a specific character. It happens a lot with Kasumi in Love series right now, because there's a lot of content that seems to relate to her, and she's one of my favorite characters. And there are genuine times where I will sit there and I will have been talking about the character, even mentioning her name a few minutes before, and then I get to a sentence where I'm trying to say like, "Oh, maybe this is about Kasumi," but I get to that name and I just flounder, and it's just like it's been deleted from my brain, and I can't concentrate or even like think of it. And the thing is, like this happens with daily like normal words, like the words like refrigerator or roof or like what time of day it is. Like it's just disconcerting when normal like everyday thoughts can go suddenly out of reach. And I worry, because that's been the one that's been getting worse. Is like I feel like it gets harder and harder for me to concentrate One of my favorite things to do is listen to audiobooks. I've always been an avid reader, and I've also really immersed myself in a lot of books via audiobooks. It lets my imagination run wild. It kind of gives me a chance to multitask so I can do mundane activities around the house, but still be able to like enjoy a good story. But I found that a few months ago I stopped. And I've had a few books come out that I was really looking forward to. I haven't started. And it hurts because I I know what the problem is. The the dance of imagining the world of an audiobook, picturing the characters, their movements, their activities, their conversations. It plays like a movie in my head, but that it's an exertion of itself. And I find that if I focus too hard on something like that, if I spend too much time like where my thoughts are in any type of work or any type of exertion, it starts to slip away from me. And I also start to develop migraines where suddenly the lights in the house become painful and I start like instinctively turning them all off. Where noise, not just from audiobooks, but from music or people talking, starts to feel agitating and almost painful. And I tend to become really reclusive. And then I also tend to get that fatigue buildup. It tends to get worse. Like it's not just tied to physical activity, it's also mental exertion or emotional distress. Like any type of strain or any type of stressor makes you feel physically exhausted. And then the mental exhaustion's now coming in through, where I used to feel like I could still at least like run free in my mind. I'm now starting to feel like I'm trapped in my mind and I'm locked away from part of it. And that's terrifying.
And it shows a similarity to another known condition called MECFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. The nice thing about medical words is they literally tell you, what's going on just by reading them. Myalgic, which is pain in a muscle group or muscles. Encephalomyelitis is the inflammation of the brain or spinal tissue. Chronic, which means it's not just once, it's repeated, consistent, persistent. Fatigue is not like sleepy, it's more like running a long race. You're exhausted, you're out of battery. And syndrome. Syndromes are not always recognized as diseases because diseases typically have a known singular cause. COVID-19, the virus causes it. Syndromes, we don't know always what causes them. According to a 2019 NIH report on MECFS, there can be difficulty with concentration and short-term memory, but also something called orthostatic intolerance, which is like not physically being able to sit up for treatment. Not that there is treatment available right now anyway.
That's the big one. I've never could have imagined that I could describe sitting in a chair as being an exertion, but that's been the haunting reality of my life for the past like 8 months now. I sit at my computer and make content, and I have to recover. I have to take a break and lay down because after a recording session of an hour, maybe two, if it's like something like Yakuza, I have to go like I get the content like saved. I start getting it processing because like there's some initial processing I have to do before I do editing. I get that going and I go crash and I go just get a breather, just catch my breath and just build up my energy again before I try and come back and try and edit. And I've been able to make it this far by recording when I can feel the best. Like I feel my peak. I feel the best I'm going to feel and I record. So you get the best of me. You get the most energetic of me like right now. This is like my best. And then I crash and then I edit and then I publish. It means that I am doing bits and pieces of work that used to take maybe 3 hours kind of all together. And now it's stretching it out over a day and doing it in these pieces and chunks. And I've gotten a bit better at managing my energy because I've had to learn and adapt to this, but it's horrible feeling like sitting up is a chore. That driving across town makes it feel like I've been jogging for like 30 minutes. And that's sitting in a car. that the most exciting activity I do outside the house is drive down 3 blocks to get groceries. And I do that because I go crazy if I never leave the house. But at least when I'm going shopping nearby, if I feel that kind of fatigue setting in, I can stop what I'm doing, get out of the store, and go home. And there have been a lot of times where I go with a shopping list and I don't even get half of it before I have to retreat back to home and back to bed and just catch my breath. Even now, I'm feeling like tired from just talking. Granted, this is a very stressful topic, so it really makes me. I think it's hitting me harder than making a video because I love making videos. It's a source of like de-stressing for me. And so I think I get better stamina. I get longer lasting sessions there because I can let go of my fear.
COVID comes from COVID-19, of course. ME/CFS has existed for decades, and it may come from a variety of different infections. We're not entirely sure. But are they the same thing?
Because we don't fully understand long COVID yet, and because we don't fully understand ME/CFS, it's very hard to sort of pinpoint sort of distinctions between the two. There's a lot of overlap in the symptomatology, in the symptoms and the clinical presentations and the phenotype, if you will, between ME/CFS or chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID.
That's exactly the point that's making here is that long COVID kind of comes in a lot of different flavors. Like he mentioned before earlier in the video, Trace showed some of the more common like lingering symptoms, and it could be like shortness of breath. That's not typically associated with uh, MECMF, CFS, MECFS. You think I'd remember that because I've been talking about it this whole time. Um, so there's a lot of like oddities there potentially, but at the same time, there are so many similarities that they do seem very similarly tied together. But there's so little like research and development on this. Trace talks about it in depth here, but I'm gonna just the spark notes just so you understand. Like I've been doing like digging into this and like ME CFS. MECFS has been woefully understudied. It has had, I believe, the report in 2019 was that of the countries of the world, because chronic fatigue syndrome has been like, it'd been discovered, it'd been like labeled and given its name and been put on the books of like the World Health Organization and other like disease like charters and trackers around the world back in 1969. And in 2019, they estimate that about 2 million Americans suffer from this disease. The syndrome, it's not disease, the syndrome. Now, majority of those cases can still have functional life. It just means that they have a kind of a permanent like cap on their energy levels, where you could have somebody who once was an avid hiker, rock climber, someone who was very physical, even like a professional sports player, and then they suddenly just don't have the energy to keep up. It's not that they don't have muscles, it's not that they don't have strength or talent, it's that they just physically can't keep up with it anymore. But they can still hold a 9 to 5 job. They can still drive across town or like run and play with like their kids or whatever. There's a small percentage of us that suffer more, and unfortunately, I'm falling into like that very small percentage. It's about 5% of those millions that suffer in like really powerfully. I'm not even the worst. If you want to see some of the worst there is, like there's some good examples of it that you can find. There's a few links I'll leave, especially to a physics girl. If you've never seen her channel is fantastic. And recently they put out videos of her case, and her case is right there at the bottom. She's one of the worst that I've ever seen. But the problem is she wasn't there when she first got it. She got COVID, and over time she got worse. And that's what scares me, because I'm seeing that I'm slowly getting worse over time. But yeah, so I was talking about funding. Sorry. The funding issue is that so it's been recognized for a long time. In 2019, They estimated about 2 million people in the United States were suffering from it in some form or another. In 2019, the amount of the greatest contributor to research for MECFS was the United States, and they allotted a grand total of $15 million for that year to research this syndrome. That's a lot of money for a family. That's not a lot of money for a research grant. In fact, from what I can tell, there was only one team actively studying it at the time in the entire country, and it was a group of specialists in Colorado. They were like the people who got that singular grant to try and do a research study. Now, they do have some promising tests that they did, some really broad spectrum stuff that's supposedly going to come out soon, but the thing is, it's all hypothetical. If you dig into the syndrome, you find a lot of cases of people who are suffering through it, and almost no cases of any form of treatment, not only being discovered, but even being researched. I think that's starting to change because where 2 million people had been affected before, we now have multiple millions more that are also now displaying similar symptoms. Like they said, the post-COVID, long-term COVID syndrome situation and the MECFS syndrome manifestations are so similar that it's hard not to draw the conclusion that there's a connection there. That in fact it could be one and the same. But the thing is, we just don't know. We just need more time to figure this stuff out. We can't make these judgments yet.
And it doesn't help that MECFS comes with this 1-2 punch of post-exertional malaise, or PEM. This is when doing anything, even a simple task like getting out of bed to boil water for pasta or checking your email, causes the body to need a ridiculously huge amount of rest. This isn't like depression where the motivation isn't there and it's something inside of you. This is physically exhausting. And resting, it might not help. You could still be exhausted hours after being in bed. Symptoms can appear 12 hours or 2 days after the physical or mental activity that triggered them. Yeah, mental activity. Again, checking your email, reading texts. This can cause PEM to flare up. Imagine if just reading about your disorder or listening to a doctor could knock you out for days.
That's what's really kind of amazing about this. It might sound presumptuous for me to assume that I'm suffering from this, but the reason why I'm pretty confident is simply the fact that I didn't know what this was. I'd never heard of EMCFS or chronic fatigue syndrome ever in my life. I'd never heard of it before. I knew long COVID was a thing, but I thought it was a collection of symptoms of COVID that just stuck around, all of them. And I just kind of got only one, I just got the fatigue and a little dizziness, where some people had the cough, some people have discharge, some people have a lack of taste. And that's kind of true, but a lot of those drop away pretty quick. The people who seem to be in these for the long haul for long COVID, it seems to be this tie to chronic fatigue. But the thing is that we were struggling to figure out what it was. Because I just kept hearing long COVID, long COVID, long COVID, but I also could never get an answer for what that meant really. It just was oh, you've got these symptoms and it seems to be triggered by COVID, long COVID stamp, just shoo, get out of the office. There's nothing else we can do. We've done all the tests. And so I was struggling because it wasn't I don't feel like I have COVID anymore. It feels like something different. It has symptoms that didn't feel present when I had COVID. Some of the simpler other ones is just a lack of heat tolerance. Any change in temperature makes me feel either I'm freezing or I'm boiling over. And I tend to bounce between the two extremes. Now that's been coming and going. It helps because as the weather's got warmer, it's been easier to keep a stable temperature in the house. But when it was still cold, I would be bouncing from cold environments to warm environments. And it felt like anytime I hit one of those adjustments, I either felt like I was freezing and needed to bundle up, or I start sweating in insane amounts. There's a little bit, there's I'm sweating because I'm kind of hot. And there's even sweating I bundled up too tightly. But then there was the violent type of sweating that you get when you're sick. And it was just gross. I was uncomfortable being around me, let alone anybody else. It wasn't even you have BO or anything. It was just you just look drenched all the time. For a while, I would actually change clothes right before I would record a video, and I would try and pick dark clothing, knowing that after the end of the video, I would have these massive, like, wet stains just from sitting at a desk in the coldest room in my house because I had a flare up and it was just going to be sweating profusely. It's just the way it was. And so like I saw the fatigue, I saw the sweating and the dizziness, and then like I started having the brain fog and I was like, what the heck is this? And I started like looking around, and finally I got a recommended video that was talking about chronic fatigue, and I watched like like a video that was like breaking down the symptomatology of it. It was very clinical, not really something I feel like would help you understand it very well, just sitting here in this kind of like fireside chat type of setting, but because it had a lot of data, but it was explaining how people felt and the symptomology, and it was like just checkbox after checkbox after checkbox of every single thing I'd been experiencing. It was like they hit it on the nail perfectly every single time. It was like you know the show where like they have the shapes coming towards people like cut out of like a wall barrier, and they have to like pose themselves to fit in. It was like I was just standing there and they were just passing through me, and I was just fitting every single one of them. Like it was built for me. Like it was a perfect cookie cutter shape. And that was really what started cementing, like, okay, I need to ask about this. So I went to my doctor and I talked about it, and we started doing more extensive tests. We started digging more. And that's what led to eventually like the heart echo check, because that's essentially, like I said, it's the last thing they can reasonably see. Because like there was a time where we were actually really excited because we thought it might be a thyroid issue because my dad has a thyroid condition. And I thought maybe that's what this is, because thyroidism can have similar symptomology, but it wasn't quite a match, but it was like far more likely and more importantly, actually treatable. And we did all the tests and tons of blood work. And I remember I actually got a note from my doctor when the test came back saying that my thyroid was perfectly healthy. And despite the fact it was like a single sentence that was just saying, like, you have like a low vitamin intake, make sure you take a multivitamin. But like there was just like almost like disappointment. Like she'd been hoping I would find an answer here too, that we would just be able to put me on a medication. You know, it's like, yeah, it sucks having a thyroidism. That's not great. That's like a lifelong condition usually. But the thing is, like, at least I'd have something, right? But no, we're here again. Every test comes back saying that I should have a perfectly healthy, perfectly functional body. In fact, I should be in the best shape I've been in my life. As many of you know, I went through a weight loss journey. It was really hard. It took a lot of effort. I had to go see professionals. I had to completely change my lifestyle. And it's not that I'm done with that journey. I'm still fighting every day because that's not something you just bounce back from. But I've made a lot of good progress. And now I can't even keep up with some of the stuff that got me where I am today. I think that's the I think that's the part that really gets me, is like there's two things. The first is that I feel like I've already done so much to try and get my life in order, to try and have the energy to do stuff, because I was so scared. I was going to spend my entire life just stuck inside and never being able to go and do things and like explore the world. And now it looks like that's exactly what's going to happen anyway, because there's nothing I can do about this. And I can't even fathom, because I've been trying for like years. It's been my primary motivation, my holy grail. It sounds so like I'm gonna sound like such a weeb, but like part of what I use to try and help motivate myself to make the lifestyle changes I needed to make in order to make this happen. My like grand prize, something I've been talking about, was the fact that I was gonna take a trip to Japan. I was gonna make a fun video where we're gonna go and visit all these wonderful sites from like my favorite games. I was gonna be able to experience some of the like beauties of the countryside and see all the great temples and everything. It was just like really get that tourist like experience, because I've never left my home country before. I've never had a chance to. And I was thinking, I'm finally in a shape where I can actually feel comfortable getting on a plane and spending all day on my feet. I can actually go and make this happen, and it would be the first of what I would think and hoped was many trips, not just to Japan but to all over the world. I've always dreamed of traveling, and seeing these things that I always read about and always wished I could just see and experience myself. And the reality now is looking because this syndrome can be lifelong. There are people who get better after years. There are people who die suffering from this. And people, when they go on that downward trend and they keep getting worse, they get bedridden. There's a man in the UK right now, I believe, living near or in Wales. I think it's near. I don't think it's actually in Wales, but he's laying in bed. He has a blindfold over his eyes, and he has a feeding tube inserted into his chest because he's no longer able to lift a spoon or fork to feed himself. Sitting up is far beyond what he's capable of and barely talks. He blinds himself because of the pain that comes from the lights around him. He puts headphones on because that's like words or conversations or rattling like fan can drive him insane. He essentially is living a waking coma. And the terrifying thing is that there's nothing that can stop me if I start heading down that road. There's no medicine, there's no treatment, there's nothing. And that's scary because I thought I could just, make it through this, right? But I'm seeing the tiny little baby steps of things getting a little bit worse, a little bit harder. My grandmother passed away recently, and we had a family kind of reunion, a celebration of life slash memorial for her. She was the grandparent I was the closest to growing up. She was always nearby. She babysat me from the time I was in diapers to the time I was in high school. Not that she was babysitting me in high school, but like you get the idea, right? She was always there. She was the loving grandma who would always spoil her grandkids, but also like gave them tough love at the same time. She would tell me stories about like what it was like watching like the moon landing on television, or like the morning she remembers the JFK assassination, or like the various wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. And also like she was there when my parents were flying home from a trip to Greece on 9/11. They were going to be home that day. So they were on the plane in the air over the Atlantic Ocean when that all happened. And it took them another 2 weeks to get home because of like the shutting down and just everything going like cold for that entire process. And the fact that like they had to go through like intense security systems that were being put into place. My grandma was one of the people who showed up at our door to take care of my family because at the time we were all way too young. Like, I mean, I was still in like at grade school. Like, it's just nuts. And so, like, she was someone who's important to me. They had her memorial 2 weeks ago, and I sent everyone in my family but me because the idea of sitting on a plane for 5 hours, only sitting up, there's no real reclining unless you're in first class, and I can't afford that. And then a 4-hour drive when we land. I knew it would kill. It would be like it would destroy me. It would leave me practically comatose. And terrifyingly, I might never recover. They often say, and I've seen like examples that people who get worse when you have long chronic fatigue is when you push yourself past your limits and you have an intense crash and you don't quite come back. And so I'm terrified of that potential thing of happening. Because right now I can still go outside. I can still make YouTube videos sitting at in a chair for an hour. If I lose that, I lose everything. I lose everything. Well, maybe not everything, but I lose the capacity to do things for me. I never thought that I would look forward to every week going shopping because it was the one time I could go outside and do stuff. When I went to the park with my family, how I was so exhausted, I just fell asleep on the grass while they played and while they like did stuff. And then I came home and I had to sleep more because I was still tired. And this is just what my life is now. And maybe I'm going to be able to see an actual discovery, an actual cure or treatment. Maybe because COVID puts a big spotlight on it now, but that's still likely years, maybe even decades away. Because studying things in a proper, healthy, scientific way is hard, and it takes time. So yeah, um, I think that's all I want to share with Trace's video. There's a lot of great content here. I didn't even share half of it. He has a lot of great stuff where he talks about like the research that's being done, the potential treatments that could be available, the timetables of that stuff. Also, just like the idea and the reality is, frankly, people just not believing. My wife told me that when she was spending time with my family, when she went out there to go see them for the funeral, a lot of them were consistently asking, like, why isn't your husband out here? Like, isn't he like he was on the I heard him talking to you on the phone just now. He sounded like perfectly fine. Like, you should be able to come out here, right? Like, they even offered to pay my ticket to come out there. Like, that was the issue. I bought the ticket. I couldn't even get a refund on that ticket. That ticket, that chair sat empty because I didn't go. And they do not understand because it's not something they can see. It doesn't matter if I tell them the doctors diagnosed it, they still don't quite get it. I've had to pull my bosses aside because I've been doing property management. And I've had to say, like, look, I can handle phone calls. I can handle getting professionals. I can even like go and just take pictures and give testimonials of like what's going on when there's an issue. But when it comes to like, being on site constantly, fixing up apartments, showing apartments, I'm starting to think I can't even do that anymore. And so I'm going to have a sit down with my bosses and be like, look, I'm really grateful that you've been giving me this work, but I'm not entirely sure if I can actually live up to the needs that you probably have. It's like I have to soft fire myself because I don't want to be in a position where they tell me that they really need something done and I just can't. I don't want to put them in that position. I don't want to feel like I've trapped them somehow. And so now that I've got the results I've got, I'm going to have this exact same conversation with them. And that's going to be harder because they're going to probably throw the same questions like, oh, you look fine. Like, are you sure? Like, maybe you just need to get more sleep at night. Maybe you're staying up too late. I sleep 13 hours a day on average. I started tracking it because I was so just overwhelmed with it. I probably have 3 sleep sessions, 1 at night and 2 in the day. I've always been a night owl, and so I do feel the most active from like 7 to like 11. But even then, if I do anything extraneous, I can't do it. I just sleep again. So yeah, this has been a really long video. And if you're still here, I'm impressed. I don't really think I have any right to have you here. I don't feel like I've earned that loyalty, that I don't know. It's a long time for you to listen to my troubles, but the thing is that if I ever slow down on making content, I'm probably going to try and take the high road for it, but you got to understand it's being pried from my cold, lifeless hands essentially, because this is like my lifeline right now. This is my gate to the world. This is my way to do something I love and share it with people because I don't talk to anybody anymore. I haven't seen another adult outside my family in months. And the closest is like the cash register people, right? That doesn't count. I ask them how their day is and they say good. And that's pretty much the extent of our entire interaction. You all mean the world to me. And it hurts thinking that despite the love and enjoyment I get from this, that I might physically not be able to someday, that I might literally be stopped. And it's not like I can do anything about it. You can't work out, you can't push yourself because because if you don't respect those boundaries, they'll snap right back in your face and you'll end up worse off than you were before. I guarantee you I've been eating right. I had to nail that diet to be able to really to lose that weight. You know I've been doing good on there. I know that I'm the healthiest I've ever been. And I'm also the most immobile I've ever been. So yeah. Chronic fatigue. It's slowly ripping my life apart. And I don't know where it's going to stop. I don't want to make you feel I don't want pity, I don't want praise, I don't want any of that. If you could just tell me that you understand what I'm saying, that you believe that I'm being honest, that would mean the world to me because I don't get that reinforcement. Most people are just skeptical, roll their eyes, think I'm being lazy. But I'm not. This is real. It's destroying me. And I wish I had any other way to say it. So I'm never going to talk about it again until the day that it pries some of that time away from you, when that directly affects the content on the long scale where I am incapable of continuing to make content in some variety. I don't want to bring this up again. I think about this all too much already, but I owed you an explanation and I needed help to do so. I'm very grateful again for the wonderful content that was kind of like my crutch here. Please, please, please follow up this video. Again, it's linked in the description. Follow the content creator. He does his homework. He knows what he's talking about. He knows his stuff. And he has a criminally small channel for how amazing the editing and writing is for his content. Most importantly, big shout out to any scientists who are working on this issue, whether it's like long COVID or ME, FCS, CFS. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And yeah, I have other good uplifting content coming soon. Got some fun changes that are being made, but I'm not going to dribble those here. There's not going to be a call to action either. I hope you have a great day. Until next video, watch with me or whatever happens to me next. I'll see you there.